Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 378 of CryptoBiography, and it's part one of Repercussions. And this is set within the same world as the last two stories, which, at least for now, I am calling the Situational Awareness world, named after the first story. And here we go. She landed in the forest. Her billionaire victim was, from what she could tell, about a kilometer away. She would have to hurry. She'd learned the area around his compound pretty well, and despite it being dark, she could tell nearly exactly where his body was. Now she just needed to find him before anyone on his payroll could. She quickly removed the pack and wadded it up, stashing it under a tree. He likely wouldn't be found unless they decided to look for it. It shouldn't matter. She'd worn gloves, and besides, by the time it could be found, she'd planned on being in another country. She was already running full tilt, her eyes well adjusted to the dim forest. Soon she came to where he must have landed. She slowed down, not wanting to be caught off guard. She saw a pine tree with several branches torn off. At its base was her billionaire victim. She went up to him. She might have simply confirmed his death and left, which would have made things less clear, at least until the cause of death of his helicopter pilot was determined. But she could hear another helicopter somewhere. She pulled out her silenced pistol and put 2 bullets in his brain. With her work confirmed completed, she immediately turned and ran towards her nearest extraction point. The pistol's cough was still loud, but she doubted anyone was near enough to hear it, and the silencing would help prevent determining where it had come from. Within an hour, she was on a private plane, jetting out of Switzerland. She was going to travel at least once more under another name before returning to the States. It had taken her some time to save up enough to accomplish this. She had multiple sources of information which allowed her to know where he would be and had multiple ways to get at him. She planned on taking a long break, then deciding what to do next. Or to be clear, deciding whom she should go after next. But she had an idea that killing a billionaire would cause waves, and before anything else, she wanted to make sure that those waves would not capsize her. She went home to the tall house tucked into a nook in the cliffs near Malibu. She watched the news in 4 languages and kept in contact with her informants. She didn't want them to think that she had forgotten about them or might look for a second payday by exposing her in some way, though she had covered her tracks with them well. She also made sure her security had been increased greatly. She liked sleeping with the windows open, but only when she was at home, because she was sure no one could enter her house or spy on her from a distance without her knowing. It was about 2 months after her victory that she first caught a hint of the hounds that had set on her trail. It came from one of her informants. This one was a pretty boy who ran in wealthy circles. He barely had enough money to qualify, but his looks, and to an extent his charm, had kept him in their loop. It also made him quite money-hungry, and so she had found him a very useful source of gossip about the mega-rich. He met her at one of the most expensive restaurants within driving distance of her house, and she would be paying. He was almost comically straight, and so she dressed in a black sheath dress that highlighted her height and her fitness. Though she was paying for the dinner and a lot more on top for his information, she knew that he charged her a lot less than he otherwise would because he was attracted to her. She'd learned his type, and so she looked the part. It was not unappreciated. "Hello, gorgeous," he said when she entered. She did a little turn and grinned at him. "Thank you," she replied. When are you going to grow your hair out?" he asked. This was not the first time he had expressed a dislike for her shoulder-length, straight black hair. She knew how to deflect it. "If I did, what sort of chance would that give the other women?" He barked a laugh. "True," he said, a little too loud. He'd started drinking even before she'd arrived. They ate and drank, though she didn't drink enough to dull her wits. She kept up the small talk, something he enjoyed, until late in the meal. Finally, she broached the subject. "So, someone finally started talking about William Monroe," she offered. Ah, yes, he said, rather several someones. Several? Yes, that's what drew my attention and made me remember that you wanted any information on the Monroe death. Interesting subject for a hobby, he said with a wink. Who then, and what were they asking? Well, they were looking for information, but the questions were very general, just asking around, you might say. He grinned and leaned back, his hair partly covering one eye in a way that was clearly meant to be casually cool, but was anything but. It was more that it happened more than once. You ask me, someone's in the early stages of an investigation, and one of the things they're looking for is enemies. So they were asking who didn't like Monroe before he died? Yep. Interesting. Anything else? They were also asking about who might have been investigating Monroe in the months up until he died. Months? Yeah, well, apparently someone close to Monroe heard about how he got spooked about a year before he died. He started getting paranoid about security, gathering information, moving around. Not that it apparently did him a bit of good. But these folks who were asking seemed to have it in their heads that whoever killed him must have had good intel on him to get through all that security. And who was asking? He gave her a piece of paper with 7 names on it. I knew you'd ask that eventually. That's my only copy, so no one else knows that I've been putting that together. Of course, there could be others, probably are, since there are that many, but even I can't be at every party all at once. He grinned again. Not that I don't try. He then made a casual pass at her, but she brushed it aside in a way that wouldn't insult him. She wanted to keep him on the lookout for more information. She passed him a wad of money that surely soothed his ego at being turned down and headed home. He was right. Someone was investigating her kill, and she had the names of 7 people who were in on it. She recognized only 2 names out of the 7. She was wealthy, but not quite as rich as the folks that her Casanova source ran with. So she'd have to do some counter-investigation of her own, something she looked forward to. And while she wanted to find out who was doing this, she was even more interested in why. Some friend or family of Monroe's interested in revenge? Some justice-minded person who saw the attack on one of the wealthiest men in the world as some sort of insult? She would have to find out. And that's the end of the story for this week. Obviously, this one's going to continue on, and I'm hoping you're enjoying it. I'm enjoying writing this. I've never quite written in this genre before. I've sort of hit around it a little bit, but I've never really written something quite like this before, and I'm rather enjoying it. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter X or Mastodon. And thanks for listening. Words and music, copyright 2024, Brandon Starr, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.